Welcome, everybody, back to Center Circle, our podcast for ASMG. Try to give you all the updates from us here at ASMG, giving you our feelings in regards to the UPSL and all things. With me, Stephen Johnson and Andre Bomar. Guys, how you doing?
Doing
Great,
great.
great, great. Good to be here.
All right, so it's been a while since we've been here, so we need to talk about a lot of things when it comes to the UPSL. We're going to stop with topic number one, that being the spring season, especially for us in UPSL Georgia. What were the hits? What were the misses? What did we see that didn't really work out? And let's talk first with Steven. Talk about your hits and misses in that UPSL Georgia spring season.
Sure. So I think we'll start with my number one hit. I mean, I think this has got to be the most obvious center square in the middle of the bingo board. Dulce United. I mean, I think they had a phenomenal season coming up from Division One. Obviously, this season they were our champions, not only in the regular season but in the playoffs. I think the magic of the home game kind of saved them a few times, especially against Atlanta United. I think Ricky Davey and company will be kicking themselves for a few pieces of silverware that they think should be rightfully theirs. And I'm not sure if I can disagree too hard with that, but I think they did a really good job of just continuing what brought them success in lower divisions. Coming up, of course, during the uh, fall season, during the spring season, I think is always the hardest because you have full strength teams. You know, no one's away at college yet. It's just been impressive. So, biggest hit of the season for me, Dalton. Biggest miss of the season, I feel like, is also going to be kind of the space, the free space in the middle of the bingo board. LGSA. I think the entire season they fumbled with um, how to manage personnel between multiple competitions, and I think their UPSL squad absolutely tanked because of it. And then that led us to a last round relegation match where they lost to Legends, basically putting their academy roster on the field. And it's going to take a little bit to get back to the top of that one. I didn't think they were necessarily going to be winning the title this year, but I feel like relegation is just such a failure of a season for what's really been one of the historically strongest teams in the conference.
Yeah, and Dre, you can talk about that as well. I mean, for both of us, we've seen LGSA since they've been in the league, and they've always been at the top, except for this season. And we've talked about it off this air throughout the season that they really had their system designed for about 4 seasons, and this was the fifth season, and it just kind of all fell apart.
Yeah, it was surprising because I think it exposed something about LGSA, and it has to do with the way that they approach league play. This is a team that's used to playing in recreational leagues for the most part. And so there is the opportunity to put in a lot of the youth and a lot of the academy players and be just fine because you're not thinking about relegation. You're thinking you got your place and you're not really trying in this sense of survival. And I think they really exposed themselves a little bit here, not really thinking about, well, we actually could go down. And I think it even was a surprise to them. But they lost a lot of veteran players and they didn't replace them. And, they have a very strong club. I mean, it's a talented club. Their teams in the reserves did very well, finished at the top of the reserve league and the youth league as well. But just like Steven said, I think that they just couldn't put it all together this season with the loss of so much expertise in their lineup. And I got to say, it's similar in a way to Atlanta Rovers. That was my big miss for me. I mean, I like Steven, like with LGSA. I didn't think of them as contenders for the title, although I thought they would make the playoffs. But Rovers was my pick to win the whole thing, and that drop off from them shocked me, and the subsequent stuff going on off the field too, I think kind of explains why they're having such an issue to the point where their head coach now is coaching somewhere else, and so there's going to be a little bit of rebuilding for them there, and I think they'll recover and do just fine. LGSA is going to sit out a season and maybe longer, so we'll see what happens in that situation. They're not going to play in Division One next season. They were relegated, but I have to agree with Stephen on the hit. Dalton United, they just hit the ground running, much like they did after winning Division One going away. It was a tight race, neck and neck with Atlanta United Academy. Great games between those two, and they've developed quite a rivalry now. And so that's going to be an interesting one to watch. But yeah, Dalton United, Coach Kiko has them running on all cylinders. They're talent rich up there in the Dalton area. So that was very entertaining to watch and enjoyable, and I look forward to seeing what they're going to do this season in the fall.
Yeah, and I just kind of want to go a little bit. Andre, you mentioned is your miss. That was actually my second choice if I had not gone with LGSA. But I mean, there's nothing like a semi-pro United States meltdown, and I think that's exactly what Rovers felt. I mean, I remember. I think I was calling the the preseason cup finals. I remember it being strongest versus Rovers. Rovers just barely eking out the win, and they just had such a free flowing attack where they're bringing those fullback up. They almost predicted the inverted wingback kind of. Uh, well, no, they were playing more with traditional fullbacks, but they were bringing like 5, 6, 7 guys forward in every play, and it was just working for them. So to see it just completely disintegrate at the end of the season was a huge shock. I remember I don't exactly remember the exact player, but I remember there was one incident where a striker had subbed into the game halfway through, not won the penalty kick, wanted to take the penalty kick, and then had it taken off him by the captain. Him then throwing a tantrum on the sidelines, and that I almost wonder. I realize that's probably not like the main thing, but I almost feel like that was kind of the foreboding like preview of what was to come with Rovers. But obviously, both parties kind of splitting ways. Coach going one place or going another place. It'll be curious to see who actually stays up because I think there's enough talent there to go around, but I think we've potentially found one of our newest rivalries for the upcoming seasons.
Yeah, that was Mbamio who threw that fit and got pulled off
Yep.
the sides. But we saw, like you said, Dre and Steven, we saw the Rovers win the regional cup in the fall. They won again in the spring, and they were hot early in the spring
I
season.
think they were
And
nationally
then
ranked.
yeah, yes, they were. That was right after they ranked. They just went straight down, and they just couldn't win anything.
Yeah, I mean, it was really shocking, and Coach Ayub Alawi, and we've talked to him during the season. He's been frustrated with the situation, and like I said, there's a lot of stuff that was probably going on in the locker room that we're not privy to. But I think we see the result and with what they're happening. So I think the split with the coach will take a lot of drama out. And with Ayub coming back in, Coach Ayub coming back in, I think it's going to be a very healthy thing for Atlanta Rovers. They'll get back on track. It just remains to be seen what happens with the players' response to that. Will they get on board? Will they unify again like they were in the previous two seasons? Or is it still in chaos? So that's something we're going to have to watch and see how that rolls out for them.
And Dre, you're privy to a little behind the scenes. We know that Atlanta Rovers is having a little bit of problems with their players. We do know that Cameron has left and gone over to Potros FC because Potros is back in the fall. We'll talk about that later on. But there's some player issues that are going on with Atlanta Rovers as well.
Yeah, there are, and there are also some rumors of players coming in that have been sort of a stalwart in the past. I know that the work of Kenny James, for instance, that there is the thought that he's going to come and join the forces there at Atlanta Rovers, and I think that's the whole thing. They need to shore up some of the problems they've been having in attack, and so that could solve a problem. But again, Kenny's coming back from rehab from injury, and so it'll be interesting to see if he can kind of melt his past talents and revive them and help Rovers get back to the summit. Really, I think they belong. Really.
So I guess that leaves just me for hits and misses. So I got to look at the table to decide what I want to do. I still have to say Dalton United has to be the hit. They just hit it out of the bricks and just took off like a rocket ship. Really, I have to say another hit for me. If I was going to say a hit, is going to be Club the Strongest, Los Tigres. They were under a lot of pressure to make to the playoffs, and they fought their way the last two matches. Now they lost. Now don't get me wrong, Steven. I know that face. Don't get me wrong. They
I
lost
was
in
just
the
waiting for you to
first
say
round.
legends. I'm not going to jump you
No, no,
on you
no.
as
Yeah,
hard, but I'm going to jump.
yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
No, as you know, when you look at it, they were under a massive amount of pressure. They were their parent club in Bolivia wanted they had no other choice. They had to make the playoffs, and they worked their tails off those last two matches in the regular season to make the playoffs. Now they got beat, don't get me wrong, but they made it. And that is for them, it's a win. Now for the miss, you really can't go wrong with LGSA. They just absolutely just flopped on all sides. Now you know that a lot of that could be the fact that their captain Gio Rios is no longer with the club, and they really didn't have the manpower to pick up where they left off.
Now, I don't really think, with or without Geo in the lineup should not doom them to, relegation. I
Yeah.
think there are bigger problems at that club than that, and I think it's interesting. There's an article talking about UPSL being sort of a feeder of players to the MLS. We've had the 13th MLS academy come and join the UPSL now, and I think that kind of shows you the yeah. There you go. Yeah, the latest is going to be Sporting Kansas City's right there, as Larry is pointing out. But yeah, I think that really shows the seriousness that these clubs take. These are high quality academies, and they see value in the UPSL. And so you can't approach the games in the UPSL like it's a rec league game. They showed up that, like Steven said, they showed up at a relegation deciding game with a with an academy team to
Yeah,
play against legends who are
Yeah.
also fighting for their lives. That cost them, and it caused all sorts of turmoil, and it cost them a place in the Premier Division. And as much as they want to complain about that and feel like they deserve to stay, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to perform on the field, and that's something that most teams in Europe understand. That have promotion and relegation. But in America, it's maybe a new idea that, hey, my place isn't safe. I have to perform, and I can't just throw anybody out there and expect to stay where I am. I'm going to have to perform and win. Otherwise, this is the result. And so, Geo being there, I mean, it was a big loss, but he still should have made the playoffs. With the talent level that they have at their disposal. And look at what happened with the reserves and the academy teams. They finished at the top of their leagues, basically. And so, yeah, I just don't. I think there are bigger problems than that. I don't know what you think,
Yeah.
Steve.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and we had something. Sorry, Stephen. I was gonna say we also had something in the spring that we'd never had before. We went into the final week with three teams fighting for first and three teams fighting for relegation. That was something that we've not seen before.
I think it
Well,
was actually
four,
only
yeah,
four. Four were in the championship race because I know Dalton, Atlanta, Birmingham, and then Kalonji, I think in that order had priorities. I remember I was praying for this like miracle run where if three things went right, Kalonji technically could have won it on the last day. But yeah, I mean it was super competitive at the top of the table. But kind of to get back to Dre's point about LGSA, I mean it's just kind of the fact of how semi-pro soccer works. You're going to have you have to prepare for high, turnover of players. You're going to have guys who go you guys who are playing different things. I mean, right now we're entering the fall season, which is I'm pretty sure we're going to say the word college at least 50 times. And it's understandable that LGSA may not be making a national championship run every single year, especially with key players missing. But I think the bar has to be above relegation. I think it has to be somewhere middle of the table, and I think that LGSA just missed this season. So be curious to see when they come back. They're big enough that they're not. This isn't going to kill them. They will have another run. They will have more opportunities in the future, but I think they'll definitely be looking back on this season, wondering what was it all really for. And I think we're
definitely.
just about at the end. I have two other things I kind of want to hit on real quick, maybe
Go for it.
in rapid fire. Actually, so first of all, I want to disagree with Larry. Um,
Oh, good.
it doesn't typically happen, but every once in a while it does. I actually think this is a pretty big miss this season for Club the Strongest, and I feel it's because of where they've been positioning. I think Club the Strongest has been on the cusp of being, a big three, big four team in this league for the longest time. I mean, they had a very competitive, and we could talk about Rovers. We've already talked a little bit about Rovers, but they had a very competitive finals with Rovers in the preseason cup. They looked good. They looked like maybe one or two things need to be tweaked, and they can at least run with the top dogs. But I think for me, Kalanji, keep in mind, they finished 10 points behind the champions, Dalton. There was that group of four between 24 and 19 points being Dalton, Atlanta, Kalanji, and Birmingham. They finished 5 points out of even fourth place. And when you look at just some of the teams that they weren't really finding results against, it's they couldn't find anything versus North Georgia. They couldn't find anything versus Birmingham. They wiped the floor with Rovers, who were struggling. They drew with LGSA. And I think there's just something with this squad where they're so close to just being a top tier team, but they just aren't finding it. Maybe it is, Larry, like you mentioned, that pressure they're under, but you got to feel like with the resources they have and with the history that Rovers that Strongest have, they've got to be one of the teams. Just squeaking into basically the wild card round, I don't think is enough for them. And I would guarantee they have that feeling internally. They need to improve.
Oh
Um,
yeah, definitely. I'll say that
yeah.
100%. I was just saying it in regards to a hit that I think if they couldn't make it into the playoffs, we could have
Oh,
seen some wholesale changes probably in the staff.
oh, the place would have burned to the ground if they missed
Yeah,
playoffs.
yeah,
But yeah, I agree. And then kind of the last one, I won't hit on this one as much, but I think quietly North Georgia and Birmingham had fairly decent seasons for what I expected them out of preseason. North Georgia
yeah,
weren't as hyped as Dalton. They were the second promotion spot. I kind of had him in the bottom of the table race. So to make playoffs for them, I think was huge. And then they've just got a great, I think they've got a good handle on the off the pitch stuff. I think they're still kind of working out exactly what's our identity at the highest level for on the pitch, but off the pitch, I think they got something going. And as you'll often see in this level of play, one feeds the other. The off pitch performance feeds the on pitch performance, and vice
yeah,
versa. So I think they're going places. Um, Birmingham, I know they had some injury concerns, but the fact that once again they were in the they were in the championship hunt at the end of the season. Still for me, obviously it's a step to the destination that they want to be, and that's the top. But it was a very good step of a season. So curious to see what they build off of here.
And Dre, you and I had the privilege to call a match in the preseason between FC Birmingham and Guatemala's national team academy. And at that time, Coach Goldfarb did not have a striker. And for the most of the first half of the regular season, there was no striker. But then they slowly built a successful season. And I think it was like 2 matches before the end of the season, they lost their captain to a major injury. And he's probably going to be out probably for this fall season as well, because I believe it was a knee injury that he sustained.
So
So
yeah,
Birmingham had a up and down season throughout that spring season.
yeah. I think this is a testament to Coach Goldfarb and what he's able to do. His experience came to play for FC Birmingham because, like you said, much like my own team, Sunderland, who lost both their strikers last season and finished the season without a striker. You have to change your approach to game day strategy. And so Coach Goldfarb, probably the most experienced coach in the division, with a lot of honors to his name, is that way for a reason. And so he's able to take what is given to him and turn that into, and maybe overachieve in a certain way, because I think that I had them pip for mid table
Yeah.
for the past season. But it kind of surprised me that they were in the hunt for a possible championship at the end of the season. And I really do think that's down to Coach Goldfarb, and I think that the players were overachieving. Now, what does that mean for the coming fall season? I think he's able to build on that. They're rebuilding. He's had a whole off season now and the previous season to work with, and so that might be a team to watch coming up. I don't think we're talking championship yet with them, but I didn't give them much credit last season either, so they may surprise me. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and we go back and we remember that conversation that we had with Coach Goldfarb last year when he said, "This game is simple. This game is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on white
Love
bread."
that.
And it's just like he knows how to win. He's been around this game for a long time.
Well, it's interesting too. His approach, in that same interview we were talking about, I asked him about scouting and things of that nature. He never really worries about what the other team is strategizing to do towards him. He wants to impose what FC Birmingham does on the other team. And I don't know anybody that has that sort of approach. He doesn't do much by way of scouting. He just prepares his own team and his own players in a certain way, and he expects to dominate from that point forward and force the hand of the other team to get out of their strategy and their game and play the game that FC Birmingham has put out for them. So it's a unique way, I think, of coaching that was new to me as an observer. So yeah, I think that's what's going to keep them in contention in the fall season. I really do believe that.
And Stephen, we talked about that late in the spring season where we saw, I believe it was North Georgia, who kept changing their formation to based upon who their opponent was. And we were talking about, is that the right thing to do, or do you just stick with one formation, live and die by that?
Yeah, I think it's a interesting battle back and forth. You have you have like system coaches in this league, and you have player coaches. Whether you play your own system or whether you play to the in the moment strengths of your players versus the opposition. I think I'm always pretty heavily leaning towards the system methodology. I think that one of the biggest things that you're dealing with in this level of play in soccer is you have so little time. You don't have time with the players, you don't have time with the coaching staff. You really have to be very effective as to what do you teach, what do you set up, and how do you get your guys ready for game day. And I actually appreciate the approach a bit more, kind of the anti North Georgia approach. I want to play one system, maybe make some minor alterations, maybe drop a midfielder here, push one up there. Um, just because you can't really prepare effectively for every opponent you're up against. I mean, even Atlanta United Academy, and they played one set system in that 4-3-3, just like the top team does, and I think it benefited them greatly because they're spending less time adapting to their opponents. They can focus more time optimizing their system, maybe making those week to week adjustments as to, well, do we want to play a little bit more direct? Do we want to play a little bit more, building up? But I think teams that focus too much on that, they're always going to suffer, especially if they go deep in playoffs, or even as we're going to talk about shortly, the national championships, where the top teams in the nation are those that just absolutely master their specific style of play.
Yeah. And that leads us, it's a perfect segue into topic number two, and that is the national champions, AS Frenzy. We had the luxury of being able to cover that Elite Eight match where they just absolutely dominated
Oh, dismantled.
Tennessee Tempo. They had nothing for them. Now, one of the things about Tennessee Tempo, they didn't have uh, Poku play that match. And you could see without Poku in that midfield, Tempo had nothing for them.
Yeah. As one of the commentators on that matchup, I can definitely say that it was a non-contest. They clearly tried to play through the midfield in their traditional strategy that they do. I felt like they had some success. I honestly think that looking back on the match, I was grappling with this a lot. The Tennessee Tempo were kind of unlucky to have come out of that first half with no goals. I think they were starting to get onto something by playing the long balls to Antonini at top of the box. And I think that just some ridiculously good saves from AS Frenzy and some unlucky finishing by Tempos prevented them from getting on the board. But I think they just panicked at halftime. And AS Frenzy, if you give them anything, they are just so good at absolutely destroying you. I think they have the best front three in the nation. I know that we're going to get to one of the specific players pretty shortly, but their play in transition just looked so good. Those front three were finding passes, the quick little 1-2s, and then one pass back across the box to be finished that I don't think I've seen found in this league. I haven't seen it in UPSL Georgia for certain. I think it was very rare seeing it at the UPSL national level that just people haven't been finding. Um, and then in defense, they just played so solid. They had the three at the back. They were stepping in. They really a bit of a negative style, kind of trying to play that transitioning counterattack for all you Manchester United fans you may be very familiar with nowadays. But they played that style and they owned it. Um, And yeah, I don't even if Poku had shown up, I think it wouldn't have been the absolute blowout that we saw on the day, but I don't think it would have been too far off.
And
Yeah,
Dre,
I think
you're kind of privy of some of the behind the scenes that AS Frenzy was made up of a couple other clubs together, and they were a very young team.
that's the thing about it. I mean, even the Golden Boot winner, 16-year-old, and that's typical with them. Diamante there, yeah, thank you. Um, and it surprised me in the sense that I pictured Tennessee Tempo as the superior squad, more experienced. They've shown a solidity that I thought was going to be unbeatable. They were my pick after they beat Dalton. They were my pick to go all the way, and it was shocking to see how how fragile they became
Yeah.
when challenged toe to toe. I don't know if it was a situation where they took their punches, so to speak, and the opponent didn't go down, and then they were a little bit out of ideas. They didn't look like they had anything to give in this match, and I'm not sure if it's fatigue or they didn't, maybe they overlooked AS Frenzy, but once Frenzy got on the front foot, Tempo was on the back foot, and I think the score was a little bit unfair to them because a lot of that came late in the match when they were trying to press forward, and they were leaving themselves really open in the back. But it turned ugly as
Yeah.
far as
Yeah.
Well, and
spectacle.
Tempo was there like 2 hours early, and uh, AS Frenzy were stuck in traffic. They didn't get there until like 15 minutes before the match
Yeah,
in that Elite Eight match.
yeah,
That's
I thought.
UPSL for you.
and then and then they go to the final four. They play. They start with Chicago Nation, and they just absolutely Chicago Nation, a big name team in the nation, and they just owned them 6-3.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same sort of thing. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really showcased kind of the level of play in UPSL where we are so offensively focused. I mean, once again, UPSL is in such a weird spot where we're just above all of like the rec leagues, but below someone like USL one, USL two. So, especially, I think defensive talent, really solid defenders tend to get picked up a bit more frequently. That leaves us a little bit more offensively minded here in the UPSL, and I think the quality of the quality of attacking that AS Frenzy showed up with, no defense was able to come up against. And the only way to beat them was to fight fire with fire, which I think in the finals, at least we had a closer matchup where they only won the title beat by a goal or two, uh, as opposed to all these earlier rounds where teams try to shut them out defensively, it just didn't work, and they didn't necessarily have the firepower back the other way. Um, and yeah, it'll be really interesting. And I think that Frenzy have hit on a really solid combination. As I think you guys mentioned before, they are kind of a compilation club. I believe their main sources coming in are from actually their head coaches uh, area in the Orlando City Academy. So obviously an MLS Academy side, and then also with BME Academy, which is a college specific, kind of like IMG. It's a sports specific prep school. Um, and I think that's really the key to succeeding at this level. You need to find these solid pools of player to pull from, and where better than from a prep academy and from an MLS academy side. So and that's really the two things that make an amazing club for me. I think it's having the right players and the right system. The right system you can work on at any time, and the right players, sometimes it's just luck. So for a lot of these teams, I think it's really important for them to figure out their system so that when the guy or the guys come in to really be that exclamation point on your team, that's what propels you to a national championship title. And I think that AS Frenzy did that almost by the book.
Yeah, I got to amen, Stephen, on that explanation because it's one thing to have fantastic players, but if you don't have the system and the coaching to go along with that, you have 11 fantastic individuals out there that can be beaten by a mediocre team.
Yeah.
A team that's put together and do that, and that's often been my criticism of a team like Pro Profile, um, who play in many different leagues, but because of that, they don't have a cohesive 11. a lot of times. So they put a lot of talent on the field, and sometimes that just overwhelms the opponent. But it's not through system. It's not through teamwork. It's just individual talent that's overcoming the opponent. And they got exposed twice by Atlanta United last season with this. And I've spoken with Coach Bruno. He's identified the problem, and he doesn't expect to have that kind of problem in the fall. I think he really was very disappointed in those results and
Yeah.
wants to come up. But it goes to what Stephen is saying, that it's more than just the individual. It's got to be the system that goes along with that. And I want to go back to kind of one of the things he was saying about there are teams that will approach a game like North Georgia, for instance, who change depending on their opponent. And while that may make sense to a certain degree, you're going to get exposed because there's going to be teams that you're going to go up to that you don't match up well with. And so you may try to change your style of play, but if you don't have the players in a specific position that can step up and go against the opponent, then you're going to be exposed. And I think that happened to them several times
Yeah.
last season. So there's something to be said about Coach Goldfarb and what he's done with FC Birmingham's approach to gameplay, in that we're going to play the way we're going to play, and
Yeah.
everybody else has to adjust to us.
Yeah.
Well, another team that I know that
Go ahead.
suffered that same thing was Legends FC. They changed their roster constantly. And some of it was also because their head coach was going through some medical issues, and in some matches he wasn't able to be there. So it was hard for his assistants to be able to make the changes that need to be made when that that lineup that they went with didn't work. So they went through, and the fact that it was their first season, they they jumped into the big pool real quick, and they found out where parts were right and where parts were wrong. And it's going to be hard for the coach to fix those things and be ready to go here for the fall. We'll see if they'll be able to do it.
Yeah, I think Legends specifically were very, very lucky that LGSA had the collapse that they did. Because if LGSA, were just a few points higher, I think it was Legends that were going down. Um, and I think Legends are a perfect example where I don't think they don't have the pound for pound talent that Kalanji do, where you can kind of just play a loose system and still just rely. It's kind of like the Steelers problem. You just have high end talent that just bails you out. Kalanji, at this moment for me, are the Steelers of the UPSL. They can win and they have many fans and they can be entertaining to watch, but there's always like that little bit of system that would take them from a contender to a champion. And I think that's exactly what you mentioned that Bruno was hitting on, and I think doing that with a bit older players is a bit harder because they have their own preconceived notions of exactly what they want to do, and bringing them together is a much harder thing. So not to be a absolute criticism of Kalanji, but yeah, I think Legends, like, they're a perfect example where they didn't have necessarily that talent to bail them out time and time again, and I think their system. You mentioned they were going through some personnel changes that, yeah, unfortunately do have to play the hand you're dealt, and that's a very poor hand to have to work through. But they just need to find something, because even if you don't have as high powered an offense to power through some of these teams, the way that they were losing, they were just getting blown open. 2-7 to Kalanji, 1-6 to Atlanta Academy, 1-4 to Dalton. Ended up with a -17 goal differential on the season. And honestly, the fact that they had that goal differential and stayed up should be a celebration of its own. But I'm curious what they come forward with this season, because I really don't know if there was too much to build on there. I think there's basically a soul searching that they have to do coming in. They have the off the field building and the off the field support. I think they need to do it, but this is going to be a very telling season for Legends. I think they have the potential, but we need to see it play on the pitch.
Yeah,
I
when we
think you're
talk
right,
about that,
Stephen.
what you were saying, Dre, that match between Kalanji and North Georgia, Junior Sandoval went absolutely off the rails and scored 4 goals in that match. He took that match over. And that's what
Oh
you
yeah.
were talking about, where Kalanji has those one or two players that can just take a match over.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a bittersweet thing for me watching Kalanji because I like the team. I'll see someone like Anthony Sumo, who is a very talented player, very talented forward. He's getting the ball and he's moving towards the goal, very strong on the ball. Holds off really well. And as he's going down, I'm yelling, "Pass it!"
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen. And I
Yeah.
see that time and time again. And he gets down and he takes a shot. He can make the shot or can go off, but a lot of times it's wasted energy with them, and which is amazing because what if you corral that enormous amount of talent that Kalanji has, and mold them into an actual team,
Yeah.
a strategically, well-oiled team. I don't think anybody could beat. I don't think Atlanta United could beat them. Dalton, anybody could touch this club.
No, I think it's that organization that separated a team like Kalanji from a team like AS Frenzy. I mean, I think they similarly have very good attacking players. I think that the Kalanji players are maybe a little bit more methodical with how they approach, and I think AS Frenzy just have three track stars that can just sprint and also have pretty good soccer IQ to be able to figure out where it goes. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that's the difference. I think every time the Kalanji guys are through on goal, they're thinking, how do I shoot this ball? Whereas Frenzy guys, it was figure it, everyone off the ball. I think it was the off the ball movement for me that really put Frenzy just above and beyond because they knew where each other were going to be. They knew the patterns that existed. That if I'm through on goal, this guy's going to be crossing over here, that guy's going to be crossing over there. And it's that level of preparation that I think a lot of teams can't quite get into because of whatever schedules they're running. Because if you're playing, match after match and you really don't get practices because you've got to compete in everything, you don't have time to come up with those set plays almost where, okay, if the striker's coming here, I want the left winger on this post and the right winger to come here. It's something that I think a lot of youth coaches will be very familiar with because that's one of the first things they teach you in the USSF coaching programs. But it's only effective if you're actually able to get the practice in. And I think that's the biggest thing we've seen from Kalanji, where some of these teams just don't have the luxury of that much time to prepare.
Yeah, and I'll finish. We'll finish up with AS Frenzy. The one thing that I'll say, the one when I knew that they had the chance to win the national title was the call that you, Steven, and Jason Longshore had, where Diamande sent the ball forward, but the player was offside. Everybody on tempo stopped, and Diamande just ran, picked up the ball, and scored
He
the
took
goal
his
like
own
it was nothing.
pass. Yeah, that oh my god, that was such a good play. I was losing my mind afterwards because it wasn't until I saw the replay that I realized it was Diomande to Diomande to get that. But yeah, they just, and I think this is the perfect thing with the players they're picking up. These are guys who are very much thinking of going pro. They're spending their days breathing soccer, um, and they just have that X factor. They have that seventh sense. They have the soccer IQ to make those kind of plays. And I think that's the thing about getting special players. They just have that, sixth sense of not only what's going on, but the classic little finger. I can see everything 5,000 moves ahead. That just put them above and beyond. And
Yeah.
as I'm not a parent myself, I realize that bringing up people to play in these to be a 16-year-old, it takes like 16 years of time. So like you can't just print kids; they gotta learn and develop. So you sometimes come down to luck as to exactly who you get at what times. But yeah, once I can't sing AS Frenzy's praises enough. They had the right team in the right system with the right guys, and they got the red result.
Yeah.
They deserved it.
All right, so we move on to number three topic, and that being the UPSL Georgia Community Cup that just happened last Friday. And between the UPSL Spring Premier Champs Dalton United against the Division One Spring Champs UMAFC, and again Dalton United with another piece that went into their trophy cabinet, and we take a little bit of highlights from some of those goals. It started out early for Dalton United, and UMA just didn't have anything to counter them, and UMA finds their way. They went into the half 3-1. Dalton was up, and then it ends 3-2 in the final.
Yeah, and I think we'll start with the champions, Dalton. I mean, this is exactly what we'd expect from out of a preseason match. Obviously, with some time off, players need a little bit of time to come back and be back to full 100% match fitness. I think there's still some room that Dalton can improve here, but that front three of Herrera, Guerrero, and Perez is still firing in all cylinders. Guerrero there with the goal. I believe he actually had the brace on the night, with the other one being Herrera with a single goal in the first half of play. But in the first half, Dalton just looked dominant. They were so hard to play through, um, and just kept banging in goals. I don't think they're going to run away with the title this season. I don't think. I honestly don't know if they're actually going to be favorites for the title because I think they're good enough, but they haven't necessarily gone to that next level where they just run the league. I think they have a considerable advantage this season that they aren't losing too many players, especially their top players, to college, which once again is going to be a running trend this season. But I think there's still room to grow. But overall, a solid performance. I'd give them like a B plus on the night.
Yeah, and one of the things we noticed about UMA, Dre, is the fact that they're having players that are moving off to college, so they're probably not going to be as strong as they were in the spring.
Yeah, and that was something that kind of made me a little afraid in this game coming up with Dalton, the power that Dalton has. Basically, UMA had their U19 team out there. And now it's a very talented U19 team. It's a team that's played together since they were toddlers, really. These guys go through the same academy with UMA. And so that they know each other. It goes back to what Stephen said about the system
Yeah.
that UMA obviously have. And I was somewhat pleasantly surprised to see how well they stood up against the pressure from Dalton and matched them in the second half, toe to toe, basically. And but for some late, game drama, could have drawn that game and pushed it on the penalties. But yeah, I think that as Stephen said, this is a typical preseason type of match. There's a lot of testing that's going on. A lot of players that maybe fringe players are getting their chance out there, and so. But I do think that Dalton will remain one of the favorites. But the difference is, and it comes from a interview with Stephen and Coach Kiko about the coming season. He said something interesting in that this season, unlike last season where they came in and kind of snuck in, and people weren't really looking at them as a title contender so much, coming straight from Division One, although they were champions. But this coming season, everybody's going to be gunning for them. No one's going to go into a match with Dalton United unprepared, and so the effort that's going to have to be put in by these guys is going to be immense to stay where they are. But they do have the talent to do
Yeah.
that. But there's Atlanta United, there's Kalanji, there's FC Birmingham, there's Atlanta Rovers that might have a resurgence. There's a lot that's there that can make a difference here. So it seems to me it's going to be sort of a wide open race for the title this season.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting because I think it's gonna be this weird mix. I guess I'll kind of get back to the cup in a sec, but just to get this last thought in, is that it's going to be this weird mix of teams that kind of overperformed a little bit at the end of last season and teams that underperformed. I think the underperforming group, I think, strongest Rovers are all going to be trying to get back to the top. I think they have a very solid chance to. And I think teams that maybe overperformed are going to try to fight to stay there. Your Birmingham's, your North Georgia's. So I mean, there's a world where we have a 6-7 way race for the title here, which I think would be absolutely perfect for us. I think Dalton are going to start the season very strong just because it's a continuation of the roster. I'd be curious to where they fall middle to end of the season because I think that's the time where if another contender, true contender arises, that's when it's going to be. But yeah, but just to kind of round out my thoughts on that cup match, I think it was an interesting performance from UMA. I think it's very clear and it's very important for everyone watching to kind of cool your expectations on UMA. This is not the UMA that won lower division by lapping the field last season. Um, it's a lot of the same ideas, but the players are new. Coach Andrew, he's definitely a very uh, tactical coach. He's got the team playing this 4-4-2. It's very pragmatic style. We saw its drawbacks. We saw its benefits. He made some good adaptations, I think, going into the second half that enabled them to punch up against Dalton. But there are definitely some places where UMA, I think, are going to get exploited. Their number one playmaker, Tony, number 30, had both goals on the night. And at some point in the match, he dropped so far into midfield that he was basically picking the ball up from the center backs, bringing it all the way forward. And against teams with solid defensive midfields, that's just not going to work. I think Kalanji Pavlotsky is going to have his hands full with just man marking Tony out of the game. but I think it's a strong enough system that they'll probably make somewhere in the middle of the pack. Maybe some players will really step up to be heroes towards the end of the season, but it's a solid enough performance. I don't think they're in the title race. I don't think they're in the relegation race, but I think this is very much a rebuilding year. And when they get some of those guys back in the following spring, that's where they're going to be like, all right, this is our championship time. So curious to see what Andrew does. I've got faith in him. I like him as a coach, like him as a guy. Let's see if I like what he puts on the field.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there was a couple times some of those forward runs that Tony had in that Community Cup match, he outran the ball itself. Like he was just moving with so much pace that his own teammates couldn't keep up with him, and there were times where even the ball couldn't keep up with him.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely the successor to Kim, who was our Golden Boot winner in the spring D1 season. He had 18 goals over the season. I believe the stat I had that I absolutely loved is that Kim, as a player, outscored two entire teams in Division One. Um, and he's definitely trying to be that big playmaker, but I think the whole squad needs to kind of come together. Kim, Tony looks a little bit maybe too much just on the ball kind of a guy. Um, to the point where I think versus lesser sides, he can have, superstar performances, but versus higher sides, he could run into some defensive roadblocks. But I mean, that's what the season's for. It's to grow and develop as not only players, but as a system. So I'm curious, but Tony himself is not going to be enough. It needs to be the full team, both going forward and going back. But the potential's there. I'm just curious to see how far that potential is going to get in the season's time.
All right, so let's move on to topic number four. Number four being this fall Premier Division season that's going to start next week, or actually this weekend. So let's look at some of the teams that are going to be coming in this season. We're going to be seeing, of course, Atlanta City, Rovers, Atlanta United, Legends, North Georgia, all from last season. Uh, Birmingham, Dalton, the champs, Kalanji, strongest. Now Potros is coming back this season. Vinotinto, of course, still there, and the two teams that are being promoted, UMAFC and SSL Soccer Saves Lives.
Well, I guess I'll jump in here, and it's an interesting lineup. I think it's very exciting to see the quality from top to bottom.
I think we lost Andre.
We lost Andre.
I think it is going to be. Oh, there he goes.
Yeah.
I guess I'll take over. It's going to be an interesting season. I think right now there's just so much we don't know. I think what is going to be the final rosters heading into the season, given the college teams starting up and taking a lot of those players' times, will be interesting. Um, there we go. I think we got Andre back now.
There we
Yep.
go. I think it might be
There we
my
go.
internet.
Yeah.
Yep.
But you were
Uh, yeah.
you're
Go
saying the
ahead. Back
same
to your
thing
thoughts.
Steven's saying.
Yeah. Go ahead with
Oh,
your
okay,
thoughts,
well,
Andre.
yeah, I was just kind of talking about Portoros there coming back. You know, it's a team that did similar to what Kalanji did. They took a season off. They had to get some organizational things done. But it's a team that, when they were in the Premier the last time, were struggling. It's well organized and it's well coached. I mean, their manager won Manager of the Season 3 years in a row, 3 seasons in a row, which means that the structure is there, but the talent level needed some work. And I think that this offseason and what they've retooled with will give them a better chance. I think I put them on par with like UMA. It's a team that I think I expect to end
Yeah.
up in the mid table somewhere. Maybe just outside the playoffs. I just, when I look at the other talent that's there, I don't think they can quite climb that mountain yet. But
Speaking of
yeah,
playoffs,
I was
question
like,
yeah,
for you, Andre, as
sure.
the UPSL representative here. Could you inform us to the particulars of the season? So how I know that we've expanded. How many teams are we sending to playoffs, and how many are we kicking back down to D1?
A good question. So this season we're going to have 7 teams that are going to make they're qualified for the playoffs, and that's up one place from last season because we've added a team. So we have 13 total teams in. The first round, the division winner will have a bye. and so the next six teams will play in a quarterfinal round, and and so it goes on to the final just like it normally would, and the winner of the division will go on to the nationals. And so, and on the downside, we have two relegation spots. The bottom two clubs automatically relegated down to Division One. Division One will promote two teams again, much like last season. The division winner will earn automatic promotion if they qualify to meet the standards of Premier. And then, of course, the Division One playoffs will determine the second team that's going to be promoted again if they are able to meet those standards for Premier. So that's kind of the setup for it. Um, we're waiting to see what's going to be happening with some of the teams for next season for 2024 that might come back, like a Laminio or a Clayton International, who probably both were going to have to come back through Division One. But that is the setup so far, Stephen.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And Stephen, you have a little bit of insider knowledge when it comes to Potros FC, so I see a little bit of a bias there as to where they're going to place in the season.
I didn't really get that much time, but for those of you who aren't up to speed on the Steven Johnson lore, actually before I came here to work with ASMG, I was working the Potros broadcast, and I believe that's kind of the transition point I made here. And they seem like a good group of guys, definitely struggling, and I definitely pair it. It just seemed like they weren't quite keeping up with the level of play. It'll be interesting who comes in, because the standards are pretty high. I very much agree with Andre, though. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team. I don't think they're going to be a relegation team. I think, and that's going to be a very comfortable place for them to come back. I think if they internally say to themselves, look, we're just, reestablishing ourselves. Let's see what works, what doesn't work. And then if we really are destined for a playoff run, it's probably going to be in the next season. So I think it's going to be down to managing expectations and managing the locker room. And that's another thing that I think is just wildly underappreciated this level of play. It is so easy to lose the locker room. If you set too high of standards, if you set too low, I wouldn't be. We clearly saw what happened with Rovers. I don't think just overnight their players forgot how to play the game. I think that it's just easy to lose the room, unfortunately. So that'll be the bigger test for Potros for me. I think it's also a test for every team that's going to be coming in. I think some have it easier, some have it harder, but end of the day, players don't want to play the game of soccer. It's really hard to win the game. So
Yeah.
that'll be interesting.
Well, I have a question for you guys, and this is kind of off the cuff, but who do you think is going to be a surprise in the coming season in Premier? On the good side and maybe on the bad side too.
Well, that brings us into topic number 5, and
Oh, did I
that is
jump
our
ahead there?
predictions.
Sorry.
That's our predictions for the fall.
All right, hey, we segue right into it. Okay.
Perfect segue. If we look at the teams that are going to be in the fall, who's going to be one that's going to surprise? That's a good question.
That's a
Stephen,
real
I'll give it to you
question.
first. Go for it, Stephen. Tell us.
Off of
surprise.
this list, you guys are gonna crucify me for this, but I almost feel that Legends might be my good surprise of the season. Maybe because I have them at a much lower position than I think you guys do, but
I did not see that coming.
I think they if they make playoffs, I know it's a 17 playoffs. If they are in the playoff hunt, I think that is a wildly good progression for them, and I could see it. Like I see all this off the pitch. They have good leadership. They have a really good organization, but they just haven't really figured out how to put it on the pitch. I feel like this, especially with some of the big teams around them getting a bit weaker because of the college season, this could be the season where they make a pretty good run. Once again, I don't think we're seeing a championship run from them anytime soon, but I think even a playoff berth has to be, well, at this point, I think not in the relegation race has to be a really good place for Legends. But I think that, with a solid idea of what is our play style, I think that we could see them towards the upper end of the table this season.
Okay, I'm stunned.
Yeah.
I do want to point out I'm pretty sure I'm perfect on the predictions thus far, so I do expect my bribe from Legends FC.
Okay, so I have to give it up to Stephen on that one because he has hit predictions dead on past season. So
maybe it was scary. Like I think I started getting the scores exactly right.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think that Legends will do better. I think I look at them as being safe. That's the way I look at them. Much like Portros, much like UMA.
In theory.
Um, in theory, in theory.
Yeah.
But here's my shocker. Atlanta City.
No.
I foresee. Yeah. Okay. Call me crazy now. But
I'm
I've
happy
been
to do
looking.
that.
You have to do that now. But I've been in contact with him a lot. I've seen what he's done, and they are focusing on one team. No reserve team, no Division One team, no academy, none of that. And so he's able to concentrate in on one. Now, Coach Joao is a very good coach, and he's able to find talent. And I think that the difference is if he can focus on this one team with the opposition that he has out there, I think that he has a really good outside shot at a playoff spot, maybe like a seventh place, sixth place. I really think so. And that's going to be a shocking thing to say to people, but I just from what I've seen, just from what I've experienced in the training situations that he has right now, I think that that's going to be the dark horse to sneak in through the back door of the playoffs. Could I be wrong? Of course I can. I was dead wrong last year. I picked Atlanta Rovers to win and LGSA to be challenging up there, and I was wrong badly on both counts. So I could be this time. Um, going on the other end of the table, though, I'm afraid for Vino Tinto. And I think that the reason is I haven't seen the development of that club at all. And maybe they'll surprise me. That they've been around for a while. They're a strong team. They have talent, but I don't see the development in the coaching staff. I don't see the development in players or in the support that they have. And I think that with the opposition that's in the division, that's going to spell doom and gloom for them unless they can turn things around as the season starts. But that's my overall thought. But I'm going to reserve who I think will win the division until I hear from Larry here.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you a tiny shocker. My tiny shocker for the match is that Atlanta United makes the playoffs, but just barely. I
Wow.
don't see Atlanta United being at the top of the table because a lot of their main players went off to college. I think that they'll come in and they'll be strong and they'll be challenging, but I think that they don't fight for the title. I think the
That's not a
title is going
tiny.
until you can tell me otherwise. Dalton United is going to be at the top of the table, and Kalanji's going to be right there fighting with them. I just don't see Atlanta United having the firepower that they had last season.
That's not a tiny shocker. That's a
That
pretty big
yeah.
one. Um, go ahead, Stephen. You take it, Stephen. Get him.
Unless I would find that hard to believe if Atlanta United were forced to play with 10 men. Unless Atlanta United were forced to play with 10 men and eh, w- eh, so here's the thing for me. I don't think they're going to I think the league as a whole is not going to look as brilliant as it did in the last season. I think everyone's kind of recovering, figuring out what their new core is. And wouldn't be shocked if Atlanta United weren't necessarily our champions this season, but I think that Atlanta United gets any player that they want.
Yeah.
Um, I would find it very hard to believe that Atlanta United are not going to be able to come up with a team that at least can match the best teams in this league. And I think if there's one thing Atlanta United has, it's a system. They know how Atlanta United plays, all the way from the top team to the U3 team. Um, every level is taught to play the same style of play. So even if they are slightly younger, slightly more improving players, I'd be very shocked if they are not firmly in the playoff race. If there was ever going to be a season where Atlanta United we have a nightmare season and they do almost miss the playoffs, I give it to you. It would be this season. But I think it's still a long shot, though I suppose that's exactly what we're doing here for. We're here for predictions. So I'll be interested to see if that pans out. We are in for a banger of a season, but I'm rooting for you like in the heart, but the head just disagrees.
Yeah, it just looking at what they have. I just, for some reason, it just tells me that I'm just afraid they're just not going to be as strong as they were. Now, granted, and Dre, you can go on to this. Atlanta United, the first MLS academy that came into the UPSL, we're now at 13. Atlanta United has been with us, what, 2 years? They've been with us about, this is their fifth season,
I believe that's going into the fifth or fourth. I have to look back
fourth or
again.
fifth season.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the point is,
Been around for a hot minute.
in those 4 or 5 seasons, in these 2 years that these MLS academies have been coming into the UPSL, not one has won the national title.
right.
That
Yeah,
shows you how strong the competition is in the UPSL.
yeah,
And
we've
if
discussed this before.
we have a team, if Kalanji and Coach Bruno get their forces in order, Dalton, I really see with Max Clare coming from Atlanta Rovers back into Dalton United, he's going to be part of their defense. Is going to be a big upgrade for Dalton United for defensively. You look at a team like North Georgia, I'm sure that their coach Burrito is going to have that team ready to rock and roll. With Birmingham, Coach Goldfarb, with all of his knowledge, I think UMA are going to come in and they're going to be somewhere in the middle, lower table. They probably won't make the playoffs. Los Tigres, they'll probably be right there at the cusp, seventh, eighth place. They might make the playoffs, but it's I right now. You've got to show me somebody that can be at the level that Dalton United is before I can
Yeah.
see that they're going to beat them.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that Atlanta United is a matter of reloading. I agree with Steven on that. Now, whether they will reload and be able to compete with the raised level that some of these other teams will remain to be seen. I'm picking pro profile for the division, um, and that's assuming some things. That's assuming that Coach Bruno Kalanji is going to focus on UPSL competition, which means his best players all the time in the division. That did not happen last season, and it cost him. But I think if he does focus like he said he was going to do, he's pulled out of one other league. He's still they're still in MLS next, but I think that that team, talent wise, if they focus and concentrate, I think they would be my favorites. But I do think Atlanta United and Dalton United will be right there with them. I think that just from Atlanta United's their reputation and pedigree, I think that they can't drop. You know that they have too much talent, too much good
Yeah.
coaching, and great system. I think that that will make the difference no matter what type of personnel that they pull in there, because they're always going to, like Steven said, they're always going to be the cream of the crop uh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
in this area. And so, but Atlanta Rovers, you know, my heart wants them to do a little bit better, especially after I picked them last season. But I think they got some rebuilding to do. And they had so much off the field problems. I think there's some healing that has to be, solved before they go on. But North Georgia United is an interesting one too. So Coach Brito, great support there, good attitude from the coaching staff. Question mark I have is just talent. I mean, there's a lot of talent up there. They're getting a
Mm.
lot. They're getting a lot of new players in, but for me, it's kind of still unknown. But it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, kind of to go back to the point about, especially not just the United, but of all MLS teams, I think there's an interesting occurrence with these MLS teams in UPSL, and that is that there's almost a ceiling for how good their players can be. Because for a lot of these other teams, the UPSL teams are the top of the ladder. The best player in Dalton United is playing on Dalton United's UPSL team. The best players in Kalanji Pro Profile are probably playing in 5 different competitions, but at least one of them being the UPSL. Um, in Lance United, if you are good enough, you are not on the UPSL team because there's more teams that above them. I mean, if you're so good, you're not having a superstar season in UPSL. You're having maybe a superstar a few weeks, and then you're going to USL. You're going to potentially not USL, but you're going to MLS next. You're going to these other competitions. So I think there's this interesting balancing act where Atlanta United, they're always going to be solid. Like there's just the fundamentals that every player who walks through your door, if you are putting an Atlanta United kit on them, you are giving it to them because they have solid enough fundamentals. I think that the coaching staff has very competent at setting up their system, but we always talk about it being it's the system plus the players that turns into a superstar team. And I almost think in the way that MLS is set up with the levels of play, you're always going to be in the place where if you have a Diomande, he's not playing in UPSL. Trust me, he's. I'm shocked that kid's not already in a pro system already. But if Diomande had a knockout season in UPSL Georgia, he's not playing in UPSL Georgia for too long. So it's interesting to see what they have. I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't win. I'd be shocked if they weren't in the picture. The only things I'm confident on right now are Dalton and Atlanta United are going to look good. SSL and Venetito are going to look not so good. And then you just kind of have this huge glob in the middle of I really need to see a few weeks of play before we really know where all the dice land.
And to piggyback off of that a little bit, when you look at Kalanji Pro Profile's spring season, it was hindered a little bit because of the fact that Tamimi, Tumasi, and Tiente were all moved over to Atlanta United's 2 team. So you took 3 superstars from Kalanji Pro Profile and then you moved them into Atlanta United's system. And like you were saying, Stephen, that just really diminished them. And that shows that Atlanta United has this path to victory to the professional ranks.
Yeah. And I mean, all these clubs are growing, but at the end of the day, if a player is offered a position on Atlanta United or somewhere else in the UPSL Georgia, they're going to Atlanta United. It's just, unless there's some absolutely crazy reason, it's just the nature of the system. So that's always going to be putting more focus on these organizations. Just have good structure, have good tendencies, have good development. Because if you have a great player, he's not going to be your player for too long. So but that's kind of the beauty of it. It's every season we kind of get a new fresh crop of player. We get new stories, new talent. So it's I don't think it's an issue. But I just think it's how the ecosystem works, and I think it's the teams that embrace that and make that part of their recruitment philosophy and their development philosophy are the ones that are going to be successful in the long term.
Yeah, I think 100%, Stephen. We're at that level. We're fourth tier in the United States for U.S. soccer, and what that means is you have aspiring players who are trying to get to the next level. If you have a successful team, you're not going to see your players season after season after season. They're going.
Yeah,
Kalanji
that's
has proven that. You know,
yeah. I mean,
yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
yeah, I think the best thing a coach can have is all his players get taken away because that means they've done a good enough job at showcasing the players. It's weird because like success breeds kind of more struggles, but at the end of the day, that is a positive reaction. So
Yeah,
it
it's bittersweet. It's sort of a success, like you say. The more successful you are, the more players you're going to lose. But that just means that you have to have that. And we've talked about it now, system,
yeah,
so that you can keep not only playing that system, but attracting the best players to your own system because they see that success, so they want to come to you. That's why everybody wants to go to Atlanta United because they're considered the top, the pivotal team to come to get your career on. And so if you have a team like Kalanji, who also are very successful in getting those players to the next level, they play. Well, we saw a total of 4 players go up to Atlanta United too, but they also are going overseas, and playing professionally in Germany, in Italy, in these different places, and so it's interesting to see how you recover from season after season, and the team that figures out how to do that the best will have continued success. But unfortunately, at this level, and in America, we're always like thinking about MLS, MLB, NFL. You're talking about the top leagues, so they're not going anywhere after that. But at this level, they're always going somewhere. So it's a little bit opposite. And so you have to get used to seeing that. Anybody who follows college sports, it's the same thing. You're not going to see a
yeah,
player more than 3 years, you know, in most cases, because unless they do a redshirt freshman type of situation, and then they're gone. And sometimes before that. So the teams in college that are most successful, are the ones who have a system that works with a variety of different talented players. And so you have to employ that type of system at this level too. And teams have done it. Kalanji's done it. Atlanta United's done it. We'll see what happens with Dalton. UMA could do it. They lost the bulk of their team to college that won the Division 1 last season. But we saw how they performed in the Community Cup with a U19 team, basically. And so there's a lot to be, had for them. and maybe they can build on that. Maybe they put a few pieces in there, and they're challenging. They're surprising everybody like Dalton did last season. So yeah, it's interesting. It's you see the future stars, playing in the UPSL, and later on you'll see like a Tamimi going on. Maybe they'll go on up to the MLS first team, and so it's exciting to see that talent develop at this stage, and it's great, and it's a privilege to be involved with a division like this where you see a lot of that happening.
Yeah, you were talking. Not only are we going to see here in the fall teams where are they going to go, you're also going to see what's going to go on with the players, like you said, Akiti James coming back to Atlanta Rovers. Another player that is out there somewhere in the ether, Lionel Taroud. He was with Atlanta United. He had been with Matata. He had been with Kalanchi Profile. Was with Atlanta United. Suffered a knee injury, seasoning knee injury last spring. Is he going to find his way back into the UPSL? We don't know. We'll find out here in the fall season. So, last minute, that pretty much wraps everything up. We're going to say thank you for watching on this episode. We'll be back next week. We'll wrap up everything that happened in the first week of the UPSL fall season for Georgia. So, for Stephen Johnson, Dre Bomar, and myself, we say thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.